Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. As well as making videos about football firms and the casual culture, now and again I like to make stories about interesting characters in football, especially if they have a good story to tell. And with Gazza, there are lots of stories, lots of chapters. But for this particular video, we are focusing on his time at Rangers. And this story has everything. It's all in Gazza's own words. Things you may not have heard before. His heavy secret drinking at the training ground. Senior players turning on him, inside information about his relationship with Walter Smith. The real reason why he signed for Rangers, why he left, death threats from Celtic fans, a rape charge, the details of beating his wife. It's all in here, so let's get straight in. I'd heard rumours that Chelsea, Rangers and Aston Villa were all making inquiries about me. I didn't want to go back to London, so I didn't fancy either Chelsea or Rangers. Yes, I know Rangers are a Scottish club. But when I first heard the talk, I thought it was referring to Queen's Park Rangers. When I realised it was Glasgow Rangers, I was much more interested. Glenn Hoddle came over from Chelsea to talk to me. I had a loose tooth the day we met, and I was more concerned about that than about anything he had to say. Doug Ellis from Villa came too, without his boat, obviously. It was Glasgow Rangers that appealed to me, right from the beginning. I remember, as a schoolboy with Newcastle, a taxi driver telling me that there was nothing bigger and more exciting in the whole of football than a Rangers-Celtic derby. He said, if I ever got a chance to play with either of them, I should. I spoke to the Rangers manager Walter Smith on the phone, and then I met him. Drink that beer, he said to me. Don't talk. I thought, this is all right, so I agreed to join them. There was, of course, more to it than that, and negotiations went on for some time between Rangers and Lazio. Around this time, my lawyer Mel Stein was charged in relation to some alleged financial scandal in the USA, and Len asked me to help out with his bail security, which I did, about 30 grand. Mel was cleared of all charges in the end, but unsurprisingly the strain of the case had a terrible effect on him. He looked on the point of collapse. In my last week at Lazio, I drove to training on my Harley Davidson. I had 9 Harley Davidson bikes at one time. I'd learned to ride motorbikes by now, wearing shorts and flip-flops and smoking a big cigar. All the lads burst out laughing. As I knew I was leaving, there seemed little point in making an effort, so I just mucked around all week. I had several cars as well as my bikes in Italy. I pranged one of the cars once, and when the Lazio fans heard it was mine, it was taken apart where I had left it in the middle of the road, by supporters pinching bits as souvenirs. Roma fans were, of course, not quite as adoring. Some of them spiked my drink once. I don't know what they put in it, but I began to see polar bears instead of trees. I had to tell the Lazio club doctor about it, in case I was called for a random drugs test. I arrived at Rangers in July 1995. The transfer fee was over 4 million, almost the same as Lazio had paid for me, so they could hardly complain that I lost them any money. It was the most Rangers had ever paid for a player. It had been the same when I went to Spurs and to Lazio. They had each broken their transfer records to sign me. I was to receive 15 grand a week, with an increase every season, plus a signing-on fee. I fell in love with Rangers right from the beginning. Thousands of fans turned up to greet me and watch me in training. I met Sean Connery, who happened to be at the club one day. I shook his hand and thought, I wonder how many boobs his hands have touched. Rangers had a great team, with 16 internationals from various countries. Brian Laudrup, Gordon Petrick, Mikhailichenko, Mark Hateley. Ali McCoist was great. He took the piss out of me from the word go. Mark Hateley seemed a bit flash, with his big hair and his big Rolex. I was told when I arrived that the tradition at Rangers was that you had to turn up for training in a suit and tie. You always had to look smart whenever you were on the premises, to maintain the good name of the club. So I went out and bought 10 Versace suits, but in all the brightest colours, yellow and red and white. I was following the club rules, but not quite in the way intended, and I got my hair bleached. I can't remember why. It must have seemed like a good idea at the time. I suppose I thought I'd have a new image for my new club. Out of my signing on fee, I bought myself a special BMW for $87,000 and a new Jaguar for my dad. Before the season proper began, I scored in a pre-season game against Galatasaray and then in 2 other warm-up games. 3 goals in 4 outings wasn't a bad start. One of these was a friendly at home against Steaua Bucharest. Celebrating my goal, I turned to the fans and pretended to play the flute. The lads had told me that this was what I should do to make myself popular with the Rangers fans. I didn't know at the time what it meant, and what they didn't tell me was the kind of reaction it would spark in Celtic supporters. But there wasn't too much of a fuss, not that time, since we were at home against a foreign team, and the crowd were all Rangers fans. It was later explained to me that this imitation of flute players marching in the orange parades mocked the Catholic Celtic supporters and was extremely provocative. I made my competitive debut in the European Cup preliminary round against Anorthosis of Cyprus, a match which we won 1-0. And I got my first competitive goal for Rangers against Morton in the Coca-Cola League Cup. In the Scottish Premier Division, we won 3 of our first 4 games before we met Celtic away. We beat them 2-0 and I produced my first league goal. I ran about 80 yards from our penalty area to theirs and stroked home a through ball from Ali McCoist. That was what really endeared me to Rangers fans most of all, scoring against Celtic. Suddenly, Rangers kids all over Glasgow were having their hair bleached. We won 10 of our first 12 league matches, but we didn't do so well in the European Cup. We were up against some tough teams, such as Borussia Dortmund and Juventus. I wanted to do especially well against Juventus. I wasn't fit for the away leg, which we lost 4-1, but I played in the home game. In that one, we were stuffed 4-0. I got into the habit of having a brandy before I went on the pitch, just to relax me. There was a hip flask with my name on it, and 15 minutes before kick-off, I took a swig. The club knew about this, but obviously they thought that if I was doing the business, it couldn't be doing me much harm. We continued to do well in the league. The vital match that would clinch it for us came towards the end of the season, on the 28th of April, when we met Aberdeen at Ibrox. We were 1-0 down early on, but I beat 2 men and hammered the ball into the roof of the net to equalise. At half-time, I felt knackered, and in the second half I was running on pure adrenaline, not energy, but I managed another goal. I could hear Alan McLaren behind me yelling, "Come on, Gazza, you can do it, keep going." Somehow I found the resources to make it a hat-trick. That was probably my best feeling ever, perhaps an even bigger high than that derby goal for Lazio gave me. So we won the title, finishing 4 points ahead of Celtic, and in the Scottish Cup final we beat Hearts to do the double. I had scored 19 goals in my first season, from a total 42 appearances in all competitions, which was only 5 fewer than I had made in 3 seasons at Lazio. It was a great beginning to my Rangers career, and I loved every minute of it. I was also voted Player of the Year in Scotland, and chosen for the same honour by the press. I was pissed before the award ceremony was even underway, and I could see Walter Smith shaking his head, knowing what would happen when it was time for me to stand up and receive my trophy. He made the organisers present it to me early, and then sent it on home in a taxi, just in case I lost it. In my first season at Rangers, when Shell was about 5 months pregnant, she answered the door at her home in Hertfordshire to a woman who announced that I had raped her. I was up in Scotland at the time and knew nothing about this. The next day at training, Walter Smith called me over and said 2 people wanted to see me. The 2 people were cops, a man and a woman. They told me I had been accused of rape. I was put on a plane, escorted to London and taken to a police station, where I was informed that I was going to be charged with raping some woman. I was shaking the whole time. I didn't understand what all this was about, but it slowly began to dawn on me that the police were saying I might very well end up in jail. The allegation was published in a newspaper, and Shell called me all the names under the sun, and rightly so. But when I told her the full story of what had happened, she believed me and stood by me, which was brilliant of her. But would it be believed in a court of law? It could easily just come down to my word against this girl's. Seatley couldn't remember the girl's name or what she looked like, but I remembered the night she was talking about. I'd been drinking in Hertfordshire with two of my mates. It was during one of my splits from Shell, and she told me she didn't want to see me anymore. We went to an Indian restaurant where we met a couple of girls. One of them invited me back to her place. Her friend came too. At her house, the first girl asked me into her bedroom and suggested that I had sex with her. I was a bit scared, mainly about her getting pregnant, but she said, "Don't worry, I've got a condom." She fitted it on me herself, and then we had sex. And that was it. I never saw her again. I didn't call her, and she didn't call me. I knew nothing about her and heard nothing at all of her till she knocked on Shell's door. It was terrible waiting for the case to come to court. I became very depressed and started drinking even more than usual, trying to cope with the depression. Then I began to get awful pains in my head. I thought I was going to explode or go mad. I even had a brain scan, as I'd become convinced I was going over the edge, but it didn't show up anything untoward. I asked the doctor what it would take, how long it would be, before I flipped. What would make me decide to top myself? I could feel it coming on. Just as I was beginning to think that the worst would happen, that the judge would believe this girl and I would be sent down, her friend who had been there that night decided to give evidence on my behalf. She confirmed that we had both been asked back to this house and that I had been invited into the girl's bedroom. I bought a large house in Renfrewshire near Ali McCoist's, which cost me $500,000. A lot of money then in Scotland, or anywhere in Britain, come to that. It had 6 bedrooms, a swimming pool and a tennis court. I loved it. Lovely house. And to start with, we were happy there. I was playing well for Rangers, and for England, loving life in Glasgow and Scotland, winning trophies, and I was injury-free. That was about the most important thing of all in my life at the time. Any time, really. It's when I get injuries that things become horrible. That I become horrible. But I had no twitches, I was sleeping okay, I had hardly any worries, hardly thought about death and other awful things. I later bought a lodge on Loch Lomond as well, for weekends and holidays for us and the bairns. Everything was rosy, till I began to turn into a bastard again. Oh, for various reasons, most of them stupid. Sometimes I think I don't know how to be good. That next season, my second at Rangers, was not as great as the first. The other teams knew more about me, so I was marked man to man, and I was also drinking quite heavily because of all my problems returning. Walter discovered I'd been on the shandies the night before a game, and, in the dressing room, he ordered me to put on my suit and leave, which I did. I went straight through the gates and drove home. Some of the fans saw me and wondered what was going on. Why was I leaving just as they were arriving? Luckily the lads won. If they had lost, it would have been worse for me. I would have felt responsible for the defeat. I was starting to let Walter and assistant manager Archie Knox down on a regular basis. I would promise not to go drinking and break my promise. One Friday night, I was sitting in my lodge on Loch Lomond when the phone went. It was Walter. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Nothing." I thought he was just checking up on me, making sure I was at home resting as I was supposed to be. "Right, if you're doing nothing, we'll pick you up in 10 minutes. He and Archie appeared and took me to a Chinese restaurant with their wives. They offered me red wine, so I had a glass. "You failed the test," they said, "but don't worry, you'll play better tomorrow." We won 5-0 against Motherwell, and I scored a hat-trick. But I was drinking a lot. During one game, I had a row with Ali McCoist, so at half-time I had a brandy. In the second half, I scored 2 goals and we won. I could see Walter and Archie in the dugout, shaking their heads in disbelief. I realise now that they were trying everything they could to help me, stop me being stupid. But they didn't know which way worked best, the carrot or the stick. I came to training drunk one day after I'd been out boozing the night before. When Walter realised, he came across, picked me up by the scruff of the neck and said, "Get out, go home, and never come back." But that wasn't the first time it had happened. In October 1996, as we were preparing to play Ajax in the Champions League, I took Shell and the kids to Gleneagles for a bit of a break. We had good fun. I took the kids swimming, and we played with these amazing hawks. But later, over dinner in the hotel, we started arguing. It was partly about my family, and it was mainly my fault. I was mixing my drinks, champagne on top of whiskey, which was stupid. The whole dining room could hear us. In the end, Shell left the table and went back to our room. I followed her and attacked her. I headbutted her and threw her to the floor. Her finger was broken, so she was screaming in agony. I tried to click the finger back into place, and that made her really shriek. The day after that, I flew off with Rangers for the Ajax match. I was in a dreadful state, worked up, racked with guilt, but just not able to say sorry. I was played up front. After 10 minutes, I was sent off. At half-time in the dressing room, Richard Gough, our captain, lashed out at me. He was mad with me for getting myself sent off so early in the game. I told him I was in a terrible state. I'd beaten up my wife, and by now I knew that the press had found out and were waiting for me, and that they'd really tear me apart. Which they did, quite rightly. Perhaps I had done a bit more in the past than just pushing her. I had twisted her arm once, and there was the time I banged her head on the floor in Italy. I don't know what happens, except that when I get in a state, I take it out on the one I love most. But I paid dearly because it all came out, and Shell and I separated. And I lost my wife. After the beating up, I felt numb inside. I began to take Zimovani tablets, which I stole from Rangers after I found out where they were kept. I had had morphine several times over the years, before my operations, when I was in terrible pain, so I knew how it made you feel good and deadened the agony. Neither Walter nor Archie Knox knew about the stolen pills. Walter was always the best counsellor I ever had. He took such time and trouble with me, put up with so much. I can never be grateful enough for what he did for me. Not long ago, I admitted to him that when I was at Rangers, I had stolen those tablets. "Ya wee bastard," he said. "If I'd known that at the time, you would have been straight out of the club." It was lucky for me, especially at this time with Rangers, when I was feeling so depressed, that I never got mixed up with any real drugs. I mean, hard drugs. I did have a joint once, at a wedding, which someone gave me. I puffed away at it till I fell on the floor laughing, but when the effect wore off, I was really scared. I vowed never to try a joint again, and I never have done. One of the things that put me off cannabis when I was young, and just starting out as a professional, was someone telling me that it could be detected in your body up to 28 days after you'd smoked a joint. I didn't want to fail a random drugs test and then get banned from football, which was what I lived for. Drinking was different. I didn't start all that till quite late anyway, but I always felt that I could sweat alcohol off. Besides, it's not illegal. Until I had that joint, which wasn't till I was at Rangers, I'd never been a smoker. Afterwards, I kept off joints, but took up cigarettes. That was a bad mistake. I'm still smoking today, though I tell myself all the time I will give up. But I also tell myself that at least it's better than cannabis. After the incident with Shell, everywhere I went, on the pitch or off it, rival fans would shout "wife beater" at me. During that second season with Rangers, I also got another leg injury and was out for 3 months. People were saying I shouldn't be picked for Rangers or England anymore, as I was a wife beater. Offers were coming in for me, so it was reported, from places like Aston Villa, even Spurs were rumoured to want me back, because it was thought Rangers might want to get rid of me. But we had a great run in the middle of the season, with 7 wins in a row, and I was back on good form. Despite everything, I still managed 34 games, scoring 17 goals. We ended up winning the league again, and the League Cup as well, this time another double. In the League Cup final against Hearts, I scored 2 goals. So, as far as the die-hard Rangers fans were concerned, I was a hero again. During my 3 seasons at Rangers, Walter Smith sacked me at least 3 times. I tried his patience so often. I remember rabbiting on in his team talk once, not paying much attention, and he got so mad with me, he picked me up by the neck. I was wearing one of my daft suits, a brand new Armani outfit in some garish colour. I don't think he actually sacked me that time, but he was well pissed off. One occasion when he did give me the bullet was that day he sent me home just before kick-off, when he discovered I'd been drinking the night before a vital match. He shouted after me that I'd never play for Rangers again, and he kicked me out again for arriving at training half-cut. He threw my boots at me and said, "That's it. Piss off and never come back, ever again." I was very upset that time. I thought that was it, I really was out. I stayed indoors at Loch Lomond for 3 days, and then one of my teammates, Alan McLaren, came to see me. Alan told me Walter wanted me to ring him, so I did. Walter said, "I'll tell you when you can have a drink and when you can't have a drink. I'm the manager." Then he got me picked up and we flew to Glasgow in a helicopter. We hovered over the Rangers ground just to take in the wonder of it all. Archie Knox once came to my house to see me the night before a match. We sat drinking and talking till the early hours, and I was thinking, what's going on? What's he going to tell me? But he was still there an hour later, still rabbiting on. "I bet you wish I'd go soon," he said. "No, no problems," I told him. "I like having you here." Which I did. And yet, I was the one who would have been fined or sacked by Walter for drinking the night before a game. When he finally left, he said, "Sleep well." And I thought, no fucking chance now. I only got about an hour. Next day, he never mentioned it, as if he had no memory of coming to see me. I didn't mention it either. Anyway, we won that game 3-1. Managers have strange ways of getting the best out of you. My 3rd season with Rangers began well. At the end of the previous one, Walter had signed a new 3-year contract. He'd also bought some very good new foreign players, like Marco Negri and Lorenzo Amoruso. Amoruso got injured before the season properly began, but Negri started off brilliantly, scoring an amazing 23 goals in his first 10 games for Rangers. But then they seemed to dry up. In the whole of the rest of that season, he managed only another 9 league goals. Walter Smith gave me a week off once and allowed me to go to London, on condition that I stayed out of the papers. So I went to stay with Chris Evans and Danny Baker, which probably wasn't the best way of keeping a low profile. On the first evening, I said I felt like doing something daft. I suggested we went into town, so we got into Chris's chauffeur-driven Bentley and drove into the West End. Near Marble Arch, we stopped in front of a double-decker bus, forcing the bus to stop as well. I got out, climbed in beside the bus driver, and persuaded him to let me take the wheel. I got the whole bus singing, "We're all going on a summer holiday." Along Oxford Street, after I'd given the bus driver his bus back, I saw some workmen mending the road, with pneumatic drills and all the gear. I thought, I've never done that, I wonder what it's like. So I asked one of them to let me have a go. I put on his hard hat and his earphones, and had a good go with his drill. I hadn't realised they were so heavy. I then stopped a taxi driver and told him I'd give him a signed England shirt if he'd let me have a drive of his cab. He agreed and got into the back with Chris. I drove the taxi down the street a little way before stopping to ask someone on the pavement for directions. "You won't believe who I've got in the back of my cab," I said to this pedestrian. Of course, he leaned forward to have a look in the back of the cab. "It's Chris Evans," I shouted. The bloke stared hard into the cab. "Nah, it fucking isn't," he said. "It's a wind-up." And he just walked away. I got a bollocking from Walter when I returned to Rangers. Someone had rung Sky TV about the pneumatic drill business and driving the bus, and they'd sent a crew out to follow me. Some of the papers had found out as well. Perhaps the stupidest thing I ever did was while I was at Rangers, during the Old Firm's New Year League game at Parkhead on the 2nd of January 1998. In the previous Celtic League game, I'd been sent off, and this time I was only sub. When I was warming up, all the Celtic fans were giving me a load of stick, most of them shouting variations on the wife-beater theme. They wound me up so much that to annoy them in return, I pretended to play the flute again. Mad? It was suicidal. I was just so furious with them for shouting abuse at me that I did the only thing I could think of that would shut them up. The first time I had done it, in that friendly at home to Stoa Bucharest when I'd first arrived, I honestly hadn't appreciated its significance, as I've said. This time I did, and I had done it in the heartland of Celtic, in front of all their supporters. Worse still, the game was being shown live nationwide on Sky TV. So there was a hell of a stink. Celtic were raging and so were Rangers. They fined me 20 grand. The next day I was in my car and a bloke drove up beside me, wound down his window, pulled out a knife and said, "Gazza, I'm going to slit your fucking throat." I was shit scared. Then death threats started arriving in the post. One letter was from someone claiming to be writing on behalf of the IRA and said they would get me. I was so terrified that I reported it to the police. They took it very seriously and tracked down the bloke who had written it. He was living in Dublin and apparently wasn't a proper member of the IRA. They couldn't do anything about his threat to kill me, as he was living in another country, but they said if he ever came over to Scotland or England, they could do him the moment he set foot on these shores for making death threats. The police came to my house and showed me how to open letters and packages, in case there might be a letter bomb. I was taught how to look under my car before getting into it, in case someone had attached an explosive. I was worried and sometimes scared, and then suddenly, after about 6 months, the police came to see me one day. They said they'd had a call from the bloke, and they were sure it was him, who now said I could forget it. They weren't going to get me after all. So that was a relief. Rangers' season was starting to collapse. In the Champions League, we had once again failed to get past the qualifying round. New rules meant we were able to go on into the UEFA Cup, but we were beaten there, home and away, by Strasbourg. So by the beginning of October 1997, we were out of Europe. We had also been knocked out of the League Cup in the quarter-finals by Dundee United. In February 1998, with quite a way still to go, Walter Smith told us he would be packing it in as manager at the end of the season. He was already a director of the club, so he was effectively kicking himself upstairs. We then found out that Dick Advocaat, the former coach of Holland, was the man who would be taking over. Walter told me there had been interest from several clubs for me, including Crystal Palace. Then Borrow came in with what Walter thought was a good offer for me and for Rangers. He felt it was likely I wouldn't be a part of Advocaat's plans, so it seemed the right opportunity at the right time. Rangers officials had probably had enough of me anyway, after the wife beating and now the flute incident. When the deal was finally done, in March 1998, the Rangers chairman, David Murray, at first said I had to return the club Range Rover or pay them £24,000, which is what it was then worth. Then he suggested we could toss a coin for it. In the end, though, he said I could keep it. I drank mostly at home. I only went now and again to a pub, usually the Duck Bay near my lodge on Loch Lomond, which I returned to after Shell had left Scotland. I might start there with a few drinks and then go home. It wasn't really social drinking. I never went out much with the other Rangers lads. I mainly drank on my own. Jimmy would often be with me, but he wasn't drinking much. It was just me. He didn't try to stop me. He knew he couldn't. He knew why I was doing it. I would drink 2 bottles of wine on my own, red or white. It didn't matter which. Then about 9 or 10 o'clock I'd pass out. Jimmy would put me to bed, but I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I'd take sleeping pills. It was also at Rangers that my pill popping got worse. Because I couldn't sleep, which has been a problem my whole life, I was on sleeping pills. This is when I discovered Zimmervein, which seemed to be good at first. Then I needed more and more to have any effect. So I went up from 1 to 2 to 3 a night and became addicted to them. So, while I loved Rangers, and those first 2 years were probably about my best ever for football, the last few months were about the worst in my life personally. So, that was the story of Gazza at Rangers. This is just one chapter of his book, his autobiography. I highly recommend the book. It really is one of the best around. I will leave a link in the description if you're interested in buying it. I own it and have read it 3 times. See you next time. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.